Want to all the saints of God. Good morning, everyone. And as it's a time of 9 o'clock, and we have a tendency to always start on time, which is a good thing because time is always of the essence when doing our Sunday school lesson because the hour just goes so quickly. So with that being said, let's rise to our feet and we'll have a word of prayer. And which, as always, we'll see how the Spirit guides us this morning in this lesson that's before us. So shall we pray? Father, it's once again upon this hour that as always we come to you with a humble heart. We come right now, dear Lord, thanking you just for allowing us to make it through yet another week, that we once again had the opportunity to set foot inside these walls, to come together as one, to just talk about, to discuss, and go over what thus saith this your word before us today. As always, dear Lord, we ask that your Spirit would truly be in the very midst of this gathering, that all that's said and done here today, dear Lord, is pleasing in your sight. And we ask as always that you would guide and direct us by the Spirit, that you may make, shall we say, teaching, facilitating easy, dear Lord, that each and every one of us will leave here with more than that which we came with. And also, dear Lord, bless those who still may yet be on their way. And for those, dear Lord, for some reason they could not make it today, we ask you to bless them all. For it's in Jesus' name we give this prayer. Amen, amen. Well, once again, good morning to everyone. And as you already know, this is our fourth lesson that we have for unit number 1, fourth lesson of a series of 13 lessons that make up our fall quarter series of lessons. If I'm not mistaken, I think yesterday was the first day, official day of fall. Yeah, first official day, even though we've already started that series. And with this fall series of lessons, all the lessons fall under the central heading of success and failure. And you remember in the very first week, we had the understanding, we needed to understand and know what does success truly mean. And we talked about how success in our world doesn't equate to how God views success. We also talk about failure and how oftentimes we look at failure as that of being a setback. But in God's world, everything's looked at a little bit different. Failures actually can be, to use the term, a good thing if you use it in the proper way to better yourselves. And with that being said, we moved into our first unit, which was unit number 1. And in unit number 1, as you recall, dealt with obedience and success. In other words, if you heed my words, if you listen to my words, if you follow my words, you will truly have success. And this is the point that God wanted to get across in these particular messages that we have today. Our lessons started off in the book of Joshua. I think Joshua pretty much covers almost half of this quarter because we only have 13 lessons, and I think 6 of them are coming out of the book of Joshua. The book of Joshua, we said, is the first book of a series of 12 books known as the oracles, or some would call them the books of history. The man we know in that of being Joshua was not a stranger to the people of Israel. He was Moses' minister, or basically Moses' servant. He was also commissioned by Moses to lead the military forces of the nation of Israel, and they had won a couple of battles with him being at the head, so they knew exactly who he was. And you'll find that also with Joshua being the military leader, he later on became the leader of the nation of Israel itself, because it was no surprise for Moses to know that he would not go into the promised land because God had told him these things. But yet God told him that it was now time to put another leader in place. And to speed things up, this is when he had Eleazar the priest present Joshua before the people and gave him a charge before all the people, said, this is the one now who will tell you when to come out and when to come in. So in other words, he was now commissioned in that position of leadership, and then that Moses would one day die and someone else would have to guide them into the promised land. Now, dealing with the books of history, or the books or the oracles as we would call them, they deal with really when Joshua takes control of the nation and he has to cross over the Jordan River into the land of Canaan that God had given to them who dwelled there, the people known as the Philistines. And those books, 12 books, then record all the events that took place during that particular time period. But in the book of Joshua opening up, you'll find that it started off with our first lesson of be strong and courageous. It dealt with a change had taken place. It said, Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore arise and take this thy people and cross over this Jordan to the land that I have already given to them. So Joshua now is leading them now into that of the promised land. But as Joshua now leads them into this promised land, you'll find that it's occupied by other individuals. And God now starts off by giving him, you could call it an encouraging word. He said, be thou strong and courageous. As I was with Moses, so shall I also be with thee. And this is the land that I shall give unto my people. And he spelled out or showed him the land that they would possess. And then later on in that very same story, it says that they now had possession or take control of the land itself, even though there was other individuals still there. But you'll find with that lesson, it laid the foundation for where this lesson was going forth after that. Because then we moved into our second lesson, which was Rahab and the spies. In this particular lesson, you'll find that things had transpired on to the point that now they were about to go into the promised land. But Joshua, being a military leader, wanted to, you could say, scope things out or spy things out. Because even though they knew where this land was at, they had to understand that there were people there. There were challenges that were before them. Joshua knew that 40 years earlier, if you recall, he himself was involved with going out and spying out the same land. And that him and these 12 individuals spied the land out, and they came back and had to give a report to the people. And you'll find that Joshua and Caleb's report was a good report. It says a good land, it's a just land, it's plenteous, and that we have possession of it. The other 10 came back with a good report also. They just said, yes, it's a good land. It's a land full of crops and cattle and so on. It's land that's ready. It's prime property. The only difference was Joshua and Caleb said, now it's time to take this land that God has given to us. The 10 said, we cannot take it because the Canaanites are there. And they said that we are but grasshoppers unto them, and we cannot take this land. Joshua and Caleb said, God has already given us land. All we have to do is just go over, but the people would not. And this was the primary reason why you'll find that the generation of 20 years and up did not see the promised land, because they rebelled against God, and God said, you shall wander in this wilderness for 40 years until this generation has ceased being, and I will raise up a new generation unto me. So 40 years have gone by now. Things may have changed. So Joshua now sends these 2 spies out. And the first city they come to is a city known as that of Jericho. And they go into the house of a prostitute. And as they go to the house of a prostitute, the king of Jericho, for some way, you could say he knows that spies are there. The Bible doesn't tell us how he knows all the information, but it says the spies are there, and he sends individuals to apprehend them. When they come to apprehend these individuals, you will find that Rahab the harlot told them, said, I don't know who these men are. All I can tell you is this, they've already left. They left before the shutting of the gates. But if you hurry, you shall overtake them, and you will catch them. They immediately go to search them out, and they go near the Jordan River, near the fords, which is these creeks and streams and so on, and the gates were shut. I said during that week that someone asked a question about why did they believe the prostitute so quickly? Why didn't they question her more? She just told them they weren't there, and they immediately left. Where if you recall in her conversation, she had said that they left before the time of the shutting of the gates. And after they went to search for these individuals, it said the gates were shut, because Jericho was a walled city. Jericho was a fortified city. And at night, they would shut the gates. The thing about shutting the gates was the enemies couldn't attack them at night. But also, with the gates being shut, nobody came in, and nobody was allowed to go out. So they knew if they didn't go at that point to go look for them, they would have a huge head start upon them. So they immediately go to look for them. But as we know, Rahab had hid the spies on the roof of her house under the flax. The flax was like a crop like wheat, in which they would cut down and lay out and let it dry out, and they would make linen and sheets and things like that. But it was not uncommon to put it on your rooftop, because therefore it would dry out in the sun. So it was an ideal place to hide these spies. But Rahab goes now to the rooftop to talk to these men, and she tells them these words, I know that Yahweh has given you this land. The point in her saying that is that you can see there that she knows something about the God of the nation of Israel, because she calls him by name. Now, in your Bible, it would just say Lord, but we know she uses his name because if you look, the word Lord is spelled in all capital letters. So that basically speaks of the name, that of Yahweh. And she shows now that she has perhaps even more faith than a lot of the nation of Israel, because she has said, we already know that God has given you the land. And she said, I already know about what God did for you on the other side of the Jordan with the Egyptians and against the people of Og and the people of Zin and so on from there, how you already defeated them. And you are now camped on the other side of Jordan, and that the people here even faint, they are afraid of you, which shows you in 40 years how big a change can come. You can remember 40 years earlier, the children of Israel was afraid of the Canaanites. Now we have the Canaanites are afraid of the nation of Israel because they see them camped on this other side of this Jordan River. So she tells them now that if they were to leave and go and hide in the mountains for 3 days, then after that, go back to your home. But she's asked only one thing, that you look out and spare those in my household. Now, One of the things I want to point out about Rahab is that some have said that why would they go to the house of a prostitute of all places? Some say, well, it was the first place that they arrived when they got there because her house was on the wall and so on from there. You look at it a little bit deeper, and we don't have time to go back over all that. Rahab, you'll find that was an individual that God placed in their lives because she was a God-fearing woman. We hear her starting out by saying that, I know that Yahweh has given you this land. We know that when you look at the writings of Matthew, that her name is recorded in the genealogy and the relative of King David and that of Christ. We also know in the roll called the faithful, which is Hebrews 11, it talks about her, by her faith, it was counted to her for righteousness, for the work that she did. Then we also see in the next book, the book of James by Jesus' brother, it talks about her acts of faith and how God blessed her by hiding the spies. So truly she was a God-fearing woman. She had her issues, but don't we all? Yep, and she still was a God-fearing woman, and God had placed her in their lives. And an interesting thing about this is that she told them hide for how many days? 3 days. You remember last week earlier, God had told Joshua, before he sent the spies out, say, in 3 days, you shall cross over this Jordan to take this land. This woman has no connection with that, but she tells them, go back now in 3 days. So you see how God places everything in place here to come about. Then that brings us to the lesson that we have of last week, which was that of the fall of Jericho. Now, in that lesson, we didn't do it. I ain't going to say we canceled it. We just postponed it to today. We didn't do last week's lesson because, as you know, we had a wonderful time with service outside, and there was too much rushing trying to do all that and get into Sunday school and so on. Somebody said, well, Kenny, you could have did virtual. Yeah, I could have. But I'm not, I'll do it if I have to, but I am not a big fan of sitting in front of a computer talking to that screen the whole time. It just doesn't work for me. I do what I have to do. So I said, I'm just going to postpone it and do it today. But if you looked at that lesson of last week, anybody did? The fall of Jericho? Nobody? We'll tell you what, did everybody know the story of the fall of Jericho? We know the story, right? If you know the story, that's enough right there. Because your question may be, well, how can you teach upon that lesson? Because you look at the lesson, all it talks about is this. God had now told Joshua to have the priests go out in the front with their 7 trumpets. Then he said the soldiers ought to be behind them. Then they ought to carry, the priests behind them ought to carry the Ark of the Covenant, followed by soldiers. And what you're going to do is, one time a day for 6 days, you're going to walk around the city of Jericho. The city of Jericho wasn't a huge city. It was about a half a mile in length. So it wasn't that like we see cities today. But anyway, you walk around that one time a day for 6 days and not say a word. And that's all they did for 6 days straight, one time a day. But he says also on the seventh day, when the priests blow the trumpets, you had to all yell, basically it's a shout of victory, and said the walls will come down. And guess what? The walls came down. And they attacked the city, they seized the city, and the city now was theirs. So someone said, what can you gather from that? Well, keep in mind, your theme for the unit tells you a lot, doesn't it? All it deals with is one thing, as all the other lessons have dealt with. They were obedient, and they had success. That's all it deals with. God told me, all you have to do is do these things, follow my words, and you would have success. That might be a hard thing to follow at first. We're just walking around, not saying a word for 6 days. Then the last day we'd yell out, and that's it. That's it. And I've always said one of the reasons why God also did things in this manner is to show that younger generation his power. Because keep in mind, that younger generation had not seen the miracles that the older generation had. Because most of those folks were born at a later time. And you'll find that all they witnessed primarily were the giving of manna each and every day. But now God shows his power by saying, just walk around and see what I want to do for you. And you'll find that by being obedient, they were successful, and then the walls themselves came tumbling down of the city of Jericho. But now we're in today's lesson. Today's lesson deals with Ehud frees Israel. We move from one book to another book. So what book are we in today? We're in the book of Judges. The book of Judges is the second book of the books known as the oracles of the books of history. Now, when we speak of judges, the first thing that probably comes to your mind is what kind of judge? Court judge. And it's an odd word to use here, judges, and that's the typical thought you have. We think back to how Moses at one point was judging all the civil affairs of the people. And I don't know if you recall, but Moses was doing this night or all day to the evening time and night till his father-in-law intervened and said, you're going to kill yourself. trying to handle all the affairs of these people. He says, set you captains over these matters. In other words, he was talking about judges, people that can judge this affair, judge that affair, and let them handle the small things. But anything that's big, let them bring it to you. So he was more of the Supreme Court, you could say. So the judges that Moses put in place were the individuals who handled the civil and judicial affairs of the people. The judges we have here are a little bit different. Actually, are quite a bit different. The judges here are actually, I'm going to call them, I guess I can use a military term, they're generals. The judges were just individuals who were in charge of the military force of Israel that God raised up to deliver them from those who had oppressed them because God had raised them up against them. I might agree with that one. God raised up judges to deliver them from the folks that were oppressing them because the ones that were oppressing them was the ones that God raised up to oppress them. I'm going to explain that a little bit further as we go into it. So this is what the judges were. They were deliverers. They were individuals who saved the people from issues that was going on. The book of Judges covers roughly 300 years. And it deals with, in the book of Judges, it deals with 12 judges. But actually there's 14 because two of them are not in Judges, are in 1 Samuel. Eli and Samuel themselves, they were judges. But it covers 300 years of the people and the issues that they had gone through. Judges, it starts off a little bit like the previous book of Joshua. Remember, Joshua started off with God telling Joshua, now Moses, my servant, is dead. Rise up now and go into this new land. Well, the book of Judges started off with this. Joshua is now dead. So you have another change in leadership. And I'm going to explain this as I get to what a judge was about. But what goes on now here, Joshua has now died. After Joshua's death, the people of Israel said, who shall now go up to fight for us? In other words, who's going to lead the armies? God says, Judah shall first go up to fight. Judah now says to Simeon, will you go fight with me? And Simeon says, yes, I will fight with you also. Now keep in mind, these two names I give you are not individuals. At this time, they are tribes of people. So these two tribes now were the ones who went out and initially started the fights. As they go out in war and they win their war, the people have peace. And after having peace and getting all comfortable, do you think they still call upon God? We have that tendency. Everything's going good now. We don't need God as much as we used to. So they would fall away from God. And they would get involved in idol worship and so on from there. When they would do this, God would then allow for those enemies that were still in the territory to come up and oppress them as a form of punishment to bring them back into correction. Now, God raises these oppressors up. And they are being oppressed now by a nation of people. And God raised up the first judge. I might butcher his name. It's something like Bartholomew. Let's call him Otis. How about that? Because it's hard to pronounce. But he raises up this judge. And this judge now goes before the people, leads the military forces of Israel because God had put this judge into place. And they win their victory. And now they have peace for some 40 years because this leader now is in place. But this leader now dies. When this leader has died, guess what the people do? They fall back into that same idolatry stuff they did before. And they have to call back upon God because now you have a new oppressor that's coming up. See, what the children of Israel did, to explain how judges come about and how God raised up the oppressors. You remember when they came into the land, God did not allow them to wipe everybody out. He left, I think, at 1.5 or 7 nations there to use as an instrument of correction upon his people if they went off in the wrong direction. So what typically would happen, I call it the 5 R's that I've always used, that's the way I can remember them, is that they would fall into the cycle each and every time. So goes, you ever heard the saying, so goes the country, so goes the leader, so goes the country? Based upon your leadership is how your country prospers. Well, you'll find that as long as they had a judge that was alive and living and doing well, the people did well. But the moment that judge would pass, trouble times would come upon them because they would not follow godly ways. So what you would have is the first R was that of rebellion. So in other words, they would rebel against God. They would push away from God. They wanted to be like Burger King. They wanted it their way and their way only. And that's the way they wanted to operate. But then in time, guess what? God would bring this second R upon them. It's called repercussions. In other words, for your actions, there's repercussions. And God would bring forth this repercussion in the form of punishment by God allowing their enemies to come up against them, to punish them, to bring about correction. And you'll find that correction was very effective, because you'll find that repercussion brought for this punishment, which made the people sorry for what it is they have done in their heart. And they truly was the third one, repented. They were truly repentant of the things that they had did, and they wanted God to save them from their oppressors. So for this reason, God then raised up a deliverer, which is basically a judge, one that God would use to guide and direct the military forces to defeat the individuals now who had oppressed them, which would now bring forth the fourth R, which is that of reconciliation. Once they would do this, God would bring them back into the fold because they had repented, and they would have what we would call peace. And peace would last as long as, guess what? The judge was living. Because when that judge died, you had the fifth R, which is repeat. They'll repeat this process all over again. So each time a judge delivered them, they would have peace. The judge died, they fall back to that same way. They would rebel. God would bring forth repercussions. Then they would bring forth repentance. Then God would give them reconciliation. And in the end, they would repeat it all over again. So now what we have is, guess what? That process is going on again. This judge, who I call Otis, which is something like Bartholomew, has given them peace for 40 years, but now he has died. And now by him dying, the people have rebelled once again against God. And by that rebellion against God, God has now brought forth, guess what? Repercussions against them by allowing the king of Moab to come out against the nation of Israel. And guess what? This punishment now is effective, because now the people are calling out and crying out to God. This is why the lesson starts off by saying, but when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord raised them up a deliverer. So now God has brought forth a deliverer unto them. A deliverer is somebody that they always desired to have. They always wanted leadership. You remember Moses was their leader. Joshua was their leader. They longed for the Messiah to come. They always wanted somebody to lead them and needed someone to guide and direct them. But who is it that they're going against? Well, I have to throw a lot of names at you right now. If you want to take notes on this one or not, because it may come back later. Hint. It may come back later. And it's just one of those heavy teaching lessons here. Okay, this king, if I may skip over some things here, this king now has come up against him from Moab. Well, who is this king? Well, to give you some backdrop, let's go back to Abraham, okay? Abraham is considered to be what we call the progenitor of the generations. In other words, everything started with Abraham. And as you know, Abraham had a wife. First wife was Sarah, and Sarah gave him a son by the name of Isaac, all right? Isaac married Rebekah, and Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau. Jacob, you remember, the name became Israel, which is the nation of Israel. But also, Abraham had a nephew by his brother by the name of Lot. All right. Now, here's where the story unfolds here. There was a time in which God had to destroy these two cities. You know, you heard of Sodom and Gomorrah. And God had to bring out Lot, his wife, and his two daughters out of this city before he destroyed it. But he told them, when you come out, don't look back when the city's being destroyed. But we know the wife looked back and she was turned to a pillar of salt. Well, as they fled from this mighty destruction, they went into these caves of Zor, and that's where they hid. Now, for the daughters, they viewed this massive destruction as, they said, all the men of the world are now dead. Who will carry on the name of our father? There's no men. So they had a plan. They said, what we're going to do is we're going to get our father drunk. And the oldest one said, I'm going to lay with him and have child. This is an adult class. What they said was this: we're going to have sex with our father, become pregnant by him, and therefore his name can continue on. So they got him drunk. It said that he had sex with his older daughter. And it also said that he didn't know when he laid down or when he got up. The next day, they said, let's do this again. But this time the younger daughter, you should have sex with your father. It said they got him drunk again. He didn't know when he laid down or when he got up. But the second daughter also became pregnant. You know, I thought about this thing as a side note, like, I don't know what the world they were drinking back then, but that was some rough stuff, boy, that he didn't know nothing about what was going on, okay? But you'll find it became pregnant. Well, the oldest daughter, her son, she named him Moab. And guess what king is coming against him now? Nation is the king of Moab. So in other words, one of their relatives, basically what you're dealing with. All of them are now family. Oh, but let's go a little further. The youngest daughter had a child too, right? That child name was something like Ben Amini, which is also known as Ammon. Now, when Moab came out to fight against the nation of Israel, he also enlisted the aid of the people of the Ammonites, which was this man Ammon's descendants. So guess what? All family going against each other once again. Oh, but something else not in your text here also. They also enlisted the aid of the Amalekites. Because you remember, we talked about Lot. Lot was his nephew, Abraham's nephew. Lot had a son by the name of Eliphaz, who had a son named Amal, who was the father of the Amalekites. So the Moabs, the Ammons, and the Amalekites are going against the nation of Israel. Guess what they all are? Family. This is all family that they're dealing with. That's why I like to always say it this way. You ever want to see a fight? Oh, watch a family fight. Oh, this is what we have going on here. So these are the individuals that he is dealing with. But in verse 1 it says again, or verse 15 it says, but when the children of Israel cried unto the Lord raised them up a deliverer, which means he raised them up a judge. And this second judge, his name was Ehud, the son of Gera. Now when it says Ehud, the son of Gera, why don't they give a last name here? Why is just the father's name given? Any idea? Nobody has an idea? Well, I thought I could learn something today because I don't know either. But you'll find in the Bible, nobody had last names at that time. You were primarily known by your father or even, let's say, a place where you lived at. You know, you might have been Tom of Jerusalem or somewhere. That's how they would identify who it is that you were, by your father's name or by your place in which you live. There were no last names at this time ever given. So they would know you primarily by your family's connection. That's how they would distinguish one from another. You know, we kind of do that. Well, take that back. We don't do that today, but we used to do that years ago. You were known by what? Your family connection. You know, I've told this story before. I can remember my first time coming to Brown Grove on Ash Cake Road. Walked in the house. Pop doing his usual, sitting there watching TV. He speaks, he all nice. Oh, but Francina. What's your last name? Who your parents? What church you go to? What part of Kingdom you from? That's how they would identify you, by residence or family figures and so on. Here the same thing is given in just in that fashion by saying Ehud, the son of Gera. It says a Benjamite, a man left-handed. Now when it says he was a Benjamite, that basically meant he was of the nation of Israel. And Israel, of these 12 sons, 12 tribes, the tribe of Benjamin was the youngest of all the tribes. But it was a tribe that later on, actually some of this leads into it really, they were a tribe also too that was almost annihilated in a civil war with the rest of the nation of Israel. A bad crime went on, which we don't have time to go into, and the children of Israel went against the tribe of Benjamin. Benjamin actually was a fighting tribe. It was getting to a point where it looked like Benjamin would defeat all of the nation of Israel by itself. But they were later almost annihilated, almost wiped out. This is why when the tribe split later on, Benjamin became part of the tribe of Judah. So that's when you hear the nation of Israel was 10 tribes to the north. You said, well, 10? Why to the south they just call it Judah? That's only one tribe. It needs to be one more to make 12. Well, because Benjamin became part of the tribe of Judah itself. But it's a very significant tribe here, is Benjamin. And it says a man left-handed, which that in of itself is odd, because the name Benjamin means son of the right hand. But he was a left-handed man. But one thing we have to understand here is this small tidbit they give about him being left-handed plays a very important factor later on in this lesson. But being from the tribe of Benjamin, it was not uncommon for people in the tribe of Benjamin to be, guess what? Left-handed. You'll find they had many that were left-handed. In, for example, Judges, the 20th chapter, this deals with when Israel about to go out to war, and they call upon the people of Benjamin to come also and fight with them. But in Judges, the 20th chapter, verse 15 says, and the children of Benjamin were numbered at that time out of the cities 20 and 6,000 men that drew sword, besides the inhabitants of Gilboa, which were numbered 700 chosen men. Among all this people, there were 700 chosen left-handed. Every one could sling stones at a hairbreadth and not miss. So he said these 700 men that were left-handed, oh, they could hit a hair and never miss. They were that good with using their left hand. It talks about later, some of these same individuals were there to help David when he became king, but he was hiding from King Saul later on in the scriptures in First Chronicles. Because First Chronicles, just so you know, is also part of the books of history and so on from there. But it says in Chronicles, just to give you a little tidbit, it says, now these are they that came to David to Ziklag, while he yet kept himself closed because of Saul, the son of Kish. And they were among the mighty men helpers of the war. And these men that came to help David were from the tribe of Benjamin. It said these words, they were armed with bows and could use both the right hand and the left hand in hurling stones, and shoot arrows out of a bow, even of the sons of the brethren of Benjamin. So they were, was it ambidextrous? They could use the left hand and that of the right hand, and they were very skilled. Which also let us know that all of us who are left-handed, we are truly blessed. Sorry for you right-hand folks, but it is what it is there. But they were left-handed. Now, you might think that's a small thing here, but it plays an important factor in this mission that Ehud is about to go on. But as it goes on, it says, and by him, a Benjamite, a man left-handed, and by him the children of Israel sent a present unto Eglon, the king of Moab. This here is believed to be their annual, or basically it's a tax contribution, many look at that to be. Because when you have a kingdom or, let's say, an empire, it needs to be funded. And it's typically funded by taxes and the taxing of the people. So when you speak of a present being brought forth, many say that this is most likely a tax contribution being brought forth by Ehud to the people. Now, some might think, well, why would Ehud bring it? Well, the way it worked was this. When you're a king, you are all what? You're all powerful. You want to be the big shot. You want to be the tough guy. So when someone would pay tribute to you, they wouldn't allow just an average person to come. They want someone who has some power and authority, because they want to show the people that now you are humble before me because I'm above you. So here you have Ehud, a judge that's now coming to Eglon to present this gift. And we know that people in power always want to be perceived that they're all powerful. You look at Putin. He loves putting out there like he has all the power. You look at Kim Jong-un. He loves to play with his little military toys and show tanks in the street that he got all this power. So everybody wants to be on top. When they had the one of the presidential conference, I don't know, the G7, 20 summit or whatever, you remember when Trump came out? And I'm not going to add to it or exaggerate. If you watch that thing, he pushes one of the guys out of the way and then goes like this to take his picture. And he does all that because he wants to be seen as most powerful. And people love that power thing. I can remember when Obama met with one of the Asian leaders. And in Asia, most of them, when they greet, they do this, don't they? They bow. Obama came to this leader and did like this, bowed and shook his hand as a sign of respect. Oh, the Republicans lost their mind. Said United States president doesn't bow before anybody. It's like, it's a greeting. He didn't get on his knees before him. He just greeted him by shaking hands. But it shows you that people in power love to stay in power and be powerful. So here we find that Ehud now has to bring this present before Eglon, the king of Moab. It says, but Ehud made him a dagger which had two edges. They say he made a dagger. A dagger is more of I guess you could call it a small sword. It had two edges, which means is what? There you go. It's a double-edged blade. Like some folks say, it'll cut you coming and going. So he had a sword here, or mini sword, a dagger, that was double-sided. And it says about a cubic length. I wish I had a tape measure this morning. That's the most common measurement you'll see in the Bible is a cubits. Now, I know we've explained this many times before. I wish I had brought a tape measure just to show you. You probably would laugh when you see it like, yeah, you're right about that. I want you to try it at home. Put it this way. What is the length of a cubit? We covered this many times. It was the most common measurement they use in Bible. What's a cubics? So I want you to understand what a cubic is so you understand how large or how small this dagger actually was. Because it say he made a double-edged dagger at about a cubic length. So the writer wanted to give you a visual of what was brought forth. Well, in the Bible, you'll find a cubics is not an exact measurement. It's an average, okay? Keep that in mind. It's an average. And the way they would measure things is, let's say, for example, this podium here. I would take my arm like this. And I would say 1 cubics, 2 cubics, maybe 2 cubics and a quarter. That's how they would measure. Because if you would take a tape measure and you would take a tape measure and put it on your elbow and on your, Let me somebody might be watching this. I almost messed up. You take a tape measure and put it on your elbow and up to your middle finger. On average, it's 18 inches for most people, unless you're truly a really tall person. But that's why they say it was an average, not an exact figure. So it's about 18 inches long. So basically, you're talking about a knife he has that is about this long, that's double-edged on both sides, that he has made. But then he says, and he did gird it under his raiment upon his right thigh. So what is that saying? Just on the same page. What he does with it? He put his right side, he girds it under. In other words, it's under his clothes. You know how they wore those long, like robe things and pants. So he has it on his right side. But he's what? Keep that in mind. But he's left-handed. The writer just want to give us this visual here. Now, keep in mind also, too, because we might have a chance to get to this, some have viewed this as the actions of Ehud that he does himself. But we know who's guiding him. God's guiding him. Now, no, we don't have all the information that's given. We don't have where God talked to him and did all these things and told him to do this and do that and so on from there. But it's obvious that God had directed his plan because it says in the very beginning, who raised up judges? It said God raised up judges. It said God brought them a deliverer by the name of Ehud. So now you'll find that he has this double-edged dagger that's about 18 inches in length, and he has put it upon his right thigh underneath his clothes as he goes to see the king and bring forth this present or tax contribution. He said, and he brought the present unto Eglon, king of Moab, and Eglon was a very what? Very fat man. I think that's good to write it that way, fat. Because a lot of times we want to be nice, right? And we could use those politically correct words. They were oversized. They were a little overweight, slightly obese. They were a large person. What the writer wants you to understand is that this guy was fat. He was a fat man, which for them, guess what, folks? It was a symbol of honor. In their culture, if you had a king, the fatter he was, the more he was honored. Because it looks as you would having riches and wealth and everyone catered to you, that you just laid back and took it easy. It sounds odd, but the bigger you were, the more the people honored you because you were a big, fat king. And it gives words that he was a fat man, a very large man. It said, and when he had made an end to offer the present, he sent away the people that bear the present. So once Ehud and the entourage he has with him present this present, or let's say the tax contribution, he now sends them away. You know, he's got what he wants, whatever this gift is, money, as most people believe it's a tax contribution. He sends them away and they leave. But as they leave, it says in verse 19, but he himself turned again from the quarries that were by Gilgal and said, I have a secret errand unto thee, O king. This verse is a very fast verse because it says a statement, then jumps back to talk to the king. What goes on here is they have now left the king. They left Jericho, and as they're leaving, they come to what's called the quarries. Some call it rock quarries, but most translations said this was a place where they had idols made out of rocks and things of that nature. So once they arrive there, now Ehud decides to go back. But what he does is he sends the people on their way because what he has to do is something that he has to do. And odds are he will not be able to pull this thing off with these individuals going back. So he goes back alone because going by himself into the king's presence, he's no threat. He's just one individual. So now he turns to go back and he says to the king, I have a secret errand unto thee, O king, who said, keep silence. And all that stood by him went out from him. So when he tells his king that I have a secret to tell you, you know, and the secret's for who? It's not for everybody. You know, I told you before, I watched when the movie, the theme, Game of Thrones was on. I never forget, I always use this in situations. This one person says to this other guy, I got a secret to tell you. And the guy says, Mike said, how many people know about this secret besides you and I? He said, besides you and me, 7. He said, that's not a secret, that's information. So when more people know, it's information. But here the king says, tell them it's a secret. He tells everybody else, keep silence. Y'all leave. Because this word is only for him. And it says that, but he himself turned again from the cords that were by Gilgal and said, I have a secret errand unto thee, O king, who said, keep silence. And all that stood by him went out from him. And Ehud came unto him, and he was sitting in a summer porch, which, I had to move my stuff here. What verse was I on? 20. Here we go. I had to bring my page back. And all this stuff went out from him. And Ehud came unto him, and he was sitting in a summer parlor, which he had for himself alone. Now, it's hot in this territory where they at. The summer parlors they had was usually in the palace as an area that just had mostly like a lattice type roof, just to sit in the shade and you're chilling out. He just laid back, taking it easy. And that place was only for the king to go into. So as he goes now into this parlor, which he had for himself, Ehud said, I have a message from God unto thee. And he arose out of his seat. Now, I wish it was more distinctive here. When he said, I have a message unto thee, he rose out of his seat. It's not saying here that Ehud rose up, but it's saying King Eglon, he rose up. Because keep in mind, these people were involved in polytheistic society. They believe in all sorts of gods, but they also believed in the God of the nation of Israel. And when you have a message from a God, it would spark their ears. So now he stands to his feet. Like, what is this message he had for me that's coming from God? And it says he arose out of his seat. In verse 21 said, and Ehud put forth his what hand? Left hand, and took the dagger from his right thigh and thrust it into his belly. The reason why they give you all that information leading up to it is some say, well, why did they give all that information? Well, of course, they're not like we are. Everywhere we go in there, you got metal detectors for everything. You can't go to a football game without going through all this stuff. So coming before a king, sure, they would most likely check to see if you have a weapon. But most people were what? Right-handed. If you had a knife in your right hand, it would be on this side. Most likely, they probably looked to the side, or touched him, maybe didn't see anything there. But he was left-handed, and the writer's very distinct by saying he put it on his right side. Because when you pull a sword out, let's say if you are right-handed, you're not going to do like this. You're going to do like this and pull it forth. So he goes to the side that nobody's accustomed to seeing. But remember, the people of Benjamin was not uncommon for them to be left-handed. It said he reached the left side and pulled the dagger out and thrust it into his belly. And it says, and that the half also went in after the blade, and the fat closed upon the blade. They give you a gruesome scene here. Basically, he stabbed him to the point that when he stuck the knife in, this man was so fat that the knife went all the way in and that the fat came over the blade that he couldn't even find it. It went totally inside of him. He stabbed him, and he stabbed him quick. And it says that the fat closed upon the blade so that he could not draw the dagger out of his belly, and the dirt came out. What that basically means, he stood in his stomach and hit his intestines. Your food, your bowels, everything just came gushing out. A grissom scene. He suffered a mortal, fatal injury here when he stabbed this king. And this was his mission. A very brave mission to take all by himself in the king's parlor with the people outside. But as he stabs the king, it said, then Ehud went forth through the porch and shut the doors of the parlor upon him and locked them. Some said, well, did he go out the back? Did he go to the side? Did he go this way, that way? Who knows? I'm guessing he went out through the front door because it talks later about how he left. Then the people knew he was gone. They immediately went to go see the king. But as he goes out, he locks the door behind him. And it says, and when he was gone out, his servants came, and they saw that, behold, the doors of the parlor were locked. And they said, surely he covers his feet in his slumber chamber. Anybody know what that means? They go into his parlor, the door's locked. They say, well, surely he covers his feet. And they walk away. It's a weird saying, but let me tell you what it means. We're in adult class, right? Okay, so I can speak freely here. What that means is it's a euphemism of that he's using the bathroom. Because keep in mind, he has on, I guess, like their dress would be what you call the outer tunic, the robe, and they had pants on. When you would go to sit on a stool, you would pull your pants down, right? Your pants come down and cover up your feet. So that's what they say, surely his feet is covered. So they say, he's using the bathroom, nobody go in. Leave it private. That's what it all speaks to. Some of you had stated they probably believed this because remember he had just been stabbed in the stomach. And it talks about the dirt came out. They might have smelled something. And they went, we can't go in yet. And all this does is give Ehud a bigger head start to get back to the people themselves. But as it says here, it says, verse 25, and they tarried till they were ashamed. In other words, they waited there quite a long time. They said, well, something's going on here. We need to go check this thing out. They tarried till they were ashamed, and behold, he opened not the doors of the parlor. Therefore they took a key and opened them, and behold, their Lord was fallen down dead on the earth. So by all that time they were waiting there, this man now was dead. It gave Ehud time to go back now to the nation of Israel, in which he blew the trumpet to gather up all the forces of Israel. Because keep in mind, he was a judge, right? Which meant he was in charge of what? Charge of the army. The judge was one who did not handle the judicial affairs of the people. In other words, this type of judge. They led the military forces against those who God allowed to come against them before their rebellion. So now he has gone back now to rally the troops to come to fight. And he's gotten a head start because, keep in mind, with the Moab, who controls the army? The king. Where's the king at, Dickenbush? He's dead. Now you have total confusion. Remember we used to watch the movies? Of course, we know now that it was all a lie. The Cowboys and Indian movies, Indians were the bad guys, but we know they weren't the bad guys now. We woke, which is true meaning of woke. But you remember they always said, kill the chief, and you got the Indians. It's like in the church, get rid of the pastor, and the sheep shall what? Scatter. So he took their leader out, which gave them a huge head start. And then the writer skips a few verses and said in 29, and they slew of Moab at that time about 10,000 men, all lusty and all men of valor, and there escaped not a man. So Moab was subdued that day under the hand of Israel, and the land had rest 80 years. So in other words now, this judge has come in. God has given them the victory, and they had peace for how long? What's 80? 80 years. A score is 20. So they had peace now 80 years under the leadership of the deliverer or the judge known as Ehud. But guess what? The day is coming where Ehud is going to die. And what do you think happened after that? They repeated the same process. They rebelled against God. God then bore forth repercussion and punishment. They then asked for repentance. God gave them reconciliation. Then that judge died. And guess what? They repeated the process all over again. So over a 300 period, Israel stayed on this roller coaster ride. As long as they had a judge in place who was a God-fearing person, they had peace. And it always would record how long they had peace. 80 years now they get peace. The king of Moab had ruled over them now for 18 years. But now God gives them 80 years of peace, and they still don't get the message. And they rebel against him again. But yet, God would always come back to them out of grace. In other words, they didn't deserve it, but because of the love he had for them, he said, I'm going to give it to you anyhow. So this is what our lesson deals with today, was that of Ehud frees Israel. But even though it says Ehud frees them, we all know who actually freed them. God freed them, because Ehud just was an instrument that God had used himself. But in our lesson next week, we're dealing with God confirms Gideon's mission. Gideon was another judge. And God showed his power here by reducing this army of a mighty force down to this mere small numbers that take on an even mightier force. But we'll get into that next week. But next week's lesson is once again coming out of Judges, and the writer kind of skips around. He does chapter 7, a few verses, then he goes to chapter 8 and does a few verses there. I always said read both chapters because I'm going to bring up a lot of things that's not in your printed text, but it truly is part of the lesson itself. And keep in mind, our theme for this particular unit was that of obedience and success. Each and every lesson dealt with the individual was obedient, and God said, if you follow my words, I'm going to add this one in. I guarantee you, you're going to have success. And each and every lesson we've saw thus far, God has given them what? Success and the victory by it. But once again, next week, read Judges. I would say read Judges chapter 7 and 8. And therefore, you get a full understanding of what this lesson deals with in Gideon and the armies that he had to deal with. But with that being said, we draw this to a close. We ask that you may rise to your feet. And Dickenbush, if you will, give us a closing word of prayer. Mm-hmm.